So I'm Jo Flick, and I work for the Montana State Library, and I am not a librarian. I'm an instructional designer by trade and training, and one of my key areas of research in my graduate work was on educational research and how to conduct research. And I'm really a data geek, so I love teaching this class and talking to everybody else about how to structure questions and surveys and when you should and shouldn't do them, and just it's all kind of an interesting area of exploration to me, and so I'm always happy to share what I know and hopefully learn something from you along the way. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to write some questions together, and hopefully you'll write some on your own as well. We're going to use that chat box a lot at the bottom of your control panel, so if you haven't found it yet, just expand your control panel. And you do that by look for a little orange box with a white arrow in it and click on that. That will expand your control panel. It'll also collapse it if it's already expanded. And then at the bottom of the control panel is the chat pane, and you'll have to expand that. If you're on a Mac, there's a little triangle. If you're on a Windows machine, it's a little plus sign next to the word chat. Click on that, and that expands the pane. And then if you go to the bottom of the pane, there is a spot you can just place your cursor in, type, hit your return bar. I see everybody is getting in there and saying hello. We have Iowa, Kalispell, Polson, Montana, Plains, Montana. I think I saw Clancy was here. Yeah, and what's that? Out in Columbus, Montana. So we've got quite a few folks, and I'm expecting a few more. So Arkansas, nice, good to have you. That is the one state in the whole union that I have never been to, is Arkansas. I need to go. Okay, so here's what we're going to really focus on: the structure of writing good quality questions. And we're going to talk a lot about these two criteria that you want every question to meet. You want your questions to be valid and reliable. And we'll talk about specifically what researchers mean when they use those terms, and we'll get some practice at correcting questions that are either not valid or not reliable. And we're going to kind of talk a little bit about, and I'll point out some common errors in writing questions and how to correct those. And we will also discuss both qualitative and quantitative data and how, we kind of played around a little bit with that last week, introduced it, but we're going to get a little more detail today. And then we're going to talk about the context of your research, whether you are doing formative or summative evaluation or investigation. And that helps inform the kinds of questions that you're going to write. So it's all about questions today. So don't be shy about asking questions. So let's start with validity. So remember I mentioned we're going to kind of get into the weeds of these two criteria for evaluating whether a question is really going to, it's a good question. We want a good question to be valid and reliable. So validity, when researchers talk about validity, they're talking about whether or not the question, asks what you want it to ask and will actually get you the answers you need to you want, the information you want. So it has to provide useful information, has to measure what you want to measure, and make progress toward the intended outcome. Now, I know this sounds like, well, of course, Jo. Why wouldn't I write a question that does all those things? But it's actually way easier to kind of get off track and for us to kind of ask questions that are nowhere near what a research question is about, or that don't really make progress toward the outcome that we're looking for, the information that we're looking for, the answers that we're looking for. So critiquing your questions to be sure they're valid can prevent you from having to do a follow-up survey, because you end up with questions that don't really make progress toward your intended outcome. And then you end up having to do another survey. As we all know. Let's see. So Steph, I'm getting a little bit of a echo from you, so I'm just going to mute your mic. So as we all know, people don't want to take endless numbers of surveys. They don't mind helping you out and providing you information if they have the sense that you've done your work and you're asking something important of their time, but they don't want to have to do a survey again. And it's nothing more disappointing than having put a survey together and then you're looking at your results and it just doesn't make sense. It isn't related to what you wanted to learn at all. So validity is where we want to be. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Well, in a minute. First, reliability. So the first questions have to be valid and reliable. They're reliable when the data that you're getting would be the same this week as next week or this morning from this afternoon, and that the questions are not likely to vary. The responses are not going to vary wildly from one day to the next or from one person to the next, and that's that the results or information that you're getting is something the data that you're getting is reliable, so consistent. And that your questions can't be interpreted differently by different people, and that's a really important issue. Last week we talked a little bit about implicit bias in our surveys, that we shouldn't do a questionnaire if we couldn't account and deal with the implicit bias. And if the questions can be interpreted differently by different people, if a word that we use in this part of the country is interpreted differently in another part of the country, then you really need to rephrase that entire question. So an easy way to check reliability is to write your questions one day and then take a break and then review them yourself. It seems very simple, but if you just read your questions the next day, sometimes you'll notice that you wrote the question in a way that it's not likely to get a reliable answer. So does the question still make sense, basically? Ask yourself that. But a better way to test if your questions are reliable is to just ask a few test subjects to look at them, or ask them to complete the survey as if they were taking it themselves, and then look at the results and see if you're actually getting data that's consistent. So here's a nice quadrant to kind of put in frame how these two things go together. So questions can be reliable, but not valid. They can be not reliable, but valid. You can ask a perfectly question that asks what you want to know, but you ask it in such a way that different groups of people won't understand it, which obviously you always want to be in that upper right-hand quadrant. So you want to be here in, let's see, reliable and valid up here. Doop, doop, doop. That's where we want all of our questions to be. So any of these terms that you guys have heard before, they're really common among researchers, but not necessarily something taught in library school or kind of picked up off the street. Are any questions about it? So let's dig in just a little deeper. So validity is really, based on what you're trying to measure. So a valid question is going to be able to predict maybe future behavior. So some examples of that might be an entrance. I just realized entrance exams kind of in the news today, college entrance exams. And of course, they're only valid if the person who says they took them actually took them. But you know how important pre-election polls are, trying to predict future behavior. Look at how much pollsters struggle to try to really be accurate in terms of predicting how an outcome is going to be. Current knowledge, competency, or skills. So you want your questions to be valid if you are evaluating learners for something like I'm going to do at the end of this class when we go take that little Kahoot test. If you were studying to take a board or vocational test, say you wanted to be an EMT or become firefighter 1, or get otherwise certified that involved an actual finished test at the end. You want to get your CDL and be able to drive that bookmobile around. You have to pass the written test, and those questions are evaluated for their validity. Obviously, a written driver's test, also another example of why validity is so important. And of course, opinion polls and votes, or identifying a void or a need. A lot of you in your research questions were kind of dancing around this area of identifying a void or need. So you really have to pay attention to the validity of your questions when you're looking for information and structuring your survey. Again, any questions? We're going to practice a little. This one we're going to practice together, and then I'm going to ask you to write into the chat box. So here's the research question. Are learners attending this training able to get help using our knowledge base and help ticket system? So I'm thinking about a library that maybe has an integrated library system in ILS and that has a built-in help system, a ticket system, and a knowledge base, so they can go to the help system and they can put in some keywords and maybe find an article or to help them with their problem, but otherwise they can file a ticket and get some response. So that's what we're trying to do, is we want to know if people who have been to our training about the health system are then able to use it really well and get their questions answered using the ticket system and the knowledge base. So the question we have related to that research question is, did you learn anything from the training session? So thinking again about validity, are we asking the right question? Is it going to get us the information we want to know? Does it have the hold on a second. Is it a useful question? And does it make it progress toward answering our research question? What are your thoughts about that? And that's my cat meowing in the background. He has an opinion about this question. Oh, I got to see some stuff coming in the chat box. Hi, Kitty. Thanks. Let's see. Were attendees able to use the ticket system? Oh, thank you, Steph. Good one. Exactly. We could really do, what did you learn from the training program, right? That would be another one. This is way too broad, right? It's way too broad. It's not really, it's missing that first issue of validity. It's not really asking the question and measuring what we want to know. We said in our research question, we want to know if they are able to do something. And then we're not asking them, we're just asking them about anything. Think about how they could answer. This is also not a very reliable question, because if it says, did you learn, first of all, it's a yes, no question, and we know those aren't usually very helpful. But if somebody said, well, I learned that I can't get the teacher's attention, or I learned that I don't even know how to log on to this stupid computer, or, they could focus on almost anything from that question. Let's see some other comments from the chat box I can share. We don't want a yes or no answer, right? Exactly, Mallory. Maybe, what is the most useful thing you learned from this training? That might actually get at it. Sarah says, you could say, I learned a great cherry pie recipe from the person next to me. Exactly. And you would be surprised how often we write questions like this, and then when we get the results back, we go, oh, that was the wrong question, but you've missed your opportunity now to ask the right question. So you've got some great suggestions on how to fix this. I was going to just add a couple more, and one is you could have how confident are you that you're able to file a help ticket on a scale of 1 to 5? Or maybe you could have everyone actually say, try to complete this in class, and then in the evaluation say, were you able to do this? Yes or no? Well, that if everybody said yes, you'd know that the class had accomplishment. Yep, there's Julie, was right in the same neighborhood. Rate your confidence in using the knowledge base and ticket system. Exactly, I'm right with you. I think that this is a perfect place to use a rating scale to get people to tell you. And then you could also maybe follow that up with what additional assistance are you going to need to be really competent at using our knowledge base and ticket system. And that would give you information on how to plan your next session. So it would be definitely measuring what you want to know. You guys are all over this. Good. Let's try another one. So let's make this question better. So if what we want to know is, are our learners able to check their knowledge base before they file a help ticket? So say we have a lot of people filing help tickets and all that information is really in the knowledge base, and you just want to try to do a training where you really focus on nudging people over to use the knowledge base first. So what do you think about this question? When should you file a help ticket? No more than once a week, as soon as a problem comes up, after I've checked with the online troubleshooting tools. How do you feel about this one? Anyone want to jump in the chat box? Oh, it's just starting to see. It does have an obvious answer, yes. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but presumably, yeah, what about when you have the question? Yes. Let's see, Sarah says, if you can convince people to actually do that, then you deserve a commendation. People always would rather ask you. It's a question for them. I know, that's actually a perennial issue. But here's Julie, and she says, is it too nitpicky to ask why the question uses online troubleshooting tools instead of knowledge base? Yeah, that's not too nitpicky at all. I mean, I think that's actually one of the problems with this question is that if you're training, you're calling it a knowledge base, and then in your evaluation question, you use the term online troubleshooting tools. Aren't you attacking the reliability of that question? Because you're actually asking your students something that you're using a different term. So you're presenting an opportunity for different people to say, well, online troubleshooting tools could be anything, but we were just talking about the knowledge base. I don't know what they're talking about. So it's important to be consistent. Good point, Julie. And then Carly has said, how confident are you in using the knowledge base to answer your questions quickly and immediately? So getting back to that rating scale, and that's might be a better way to go after this. And Steph says, C seems like it's scolding me for filing a ticket before checking. It is a little, yeah, what do you know, like the principal looking down his nose at you. And the other thing I think that's about this question is, we're always going to have somebody in the class who's just snarky and say, I'm gonna file a ticket anytime I want. I pay for the service, and so you may not be getting the answer that you want. So I think when you're looking at questions, it's always important to be critical of your own work. Critique yourself. All right, let's try the next one. So a lot of people familiar with this issue. You're thinking about changing the time of the Saturday story time. Somebody has convinced you that you might get more attendance, or your board has insisted. So you've got to get a little bit of data on this, and you've got to do it fast. And of course, we know that questionnaires are good fast ways to get data. So how do you like this question? What do you like about story time? It doesn't get to the point. Absolutely, Donna, you are absolutely correct. It's too broad. It might be collecting some information, but it sure doesn't have much to do with our research question. And that's why we do a research question. If you get the research question down and your board has agreed, yes, that's what we want to know. And the people who want you to change the Saturday story time, you talk to them and the stakeholders and the staff, they all agree, yes. Will we get more attendance? Well, knowing what they like about story time doesn't really address that issue at all. Sarah says, I could see that being a catch-all at the end if you want valid answers. You want a couple more specific first, and absolutely true. Way too broad. So let's move on to reliability. Kind of got validity down here. So reliability. So say you want to know that did the learner achieve a new skill by attending the training? These are some questions. Which ones do you like in terms of things that would get you reliable, consistent data? Pick one. 1, 2, 3, or 4. So did you attend today? Do you know when to enter a help ticket and how to do it? Julie says she likes 4. What do you need to put your training into practice? Follow-up training, help from my peers, time to practice, support from my supervisor. Some people like this one. Do you know when to enter a help ticket and how to do it? Oh, getting quite a few votes for number 2. This one that tells about how did they do it in the past day. How often did you use the online help resources in the past day? This question could have some problems with reliability because it might make a big difference whether they use help resources on a Tuesday or a Saturday. So you might want to make this more reliable, you might want to make it a longer period of time. So I think we've all agreed that number 1 is just simply an unreliable question because it's not going to tell us anything related to our area of questioning, and certainly our group would. Every person in the group is going to answer that a little bit differently. It's not a valid question, and it's certainly not reliable. Without clearly putting the question in some kind of context, they could say, I attended today because my boss told me to. They could say they attended because they heard there were really good snacks. I personally am often motivated by that, and you could say they attended today because they didn't want to do something else that they were assigned to do today. Completely off the mark. The second one, and several of you liked it, although it is valid, it's probably not reliable because it's asking 2 questions, and that messes with reliability. So the first part of the question is, do you know when to enter help ticket? Okay, maybe you do. But then the second part is, and how to do it. Maybe you don't. So you know when to enter a help ticket, but you don't know how to enter a help ticket. How will you answer that question? It's impossible. You always want to avoid conjunctions in your questions. No ands, no buts, no ors. And this is what researchers would call a double-barreled question. Only certain people may know when and how. Some people may know how but not when, and some people may know when but not how. And so you've kind of screwed up your results. So it makes it an unreliable question. So number 3, likely this would be a very low response on a Monday, right? So this one is unreliable because we know that the days of the week and the number of and how libraries operate, that very likely have different responses different days. So it's not going to get you very reliable data. Does number 4 allow for multiple answers? Can you pick more than one Is that what you're asking, like a checkbox instead of a multiple choice? Yeah. If it did, they could check all of those. And the other thing is, what if they had something else that they needed? Like maybe we've got a list of 4 things here. There could be other things. Maybe they need a computer or access to the technology. So to be reliable, a checklist like this would have to have an other and an opportunity for people to write in one more thing. And then Margaret says, well, what if you put in specific days of the week for number 3? How often do you use online help resources on Monday? Or I think the other way to, that's one way you might be able to address the reliability issues of that question. But I think a better way might be to expand the period of time and say, how often did you use online help resources in the past month? And then say, not at all, one or 2 times, 3 or 4 times. And by the way, when you're writing questions that have answers like that, make sure you don't have any overlap in the answer. So if you never want to have like 100 to 200, 200 to 300, because then some people whose proper response is 200 don't know whether they are supposed to select the first answer or the second answer. So you should always be 100 to 200, 201 to 300, 301 to 400. So yeah. So that's another little tip is with reliability is not to structure questions so that it makes it impossible for your respondents to give you reliable data. So really all these questions have a little bit of a problem, and that's why it's kind of fun, but they're not imperfect. Some of them are quite valid, just not terribly reliable. Are you getting good at this? Are you having fun? Okay, let's work together and make this a better question. So if we want to know if we change that time of story time, that makes me nervous just saying that. Will we get more attendance? So choose which time works for you to attend story time on Saturday, morning or afternoon. How would we make this question better? You guys can unmute your microphones and just jump in the conversation if you wish. Right, there's Steph, an option for both. That's one way to address the reliability. Which time works best for you to attend story time on Saturday? Morning, afternoon, anytime. That's she writes that she's better in print. It's fine to use the chat box. And the only reason I'm reading all of these is that for the people who are listening to the recording, they can't see the chat box. So that's why I keep reading them. But yeah, unfortunately, this isn't an exhaustive list. So, and some people are going to want both. You also may find that morning will work for someone if it's like 11 o'clock in the morning, but 6 a.m. is not going to work for them. So it's a little bit better to have specific. Oh, and thank you, Mallory. You came in right on cue. Mallory says give specific time slots, 9 to 10, 11 to 12, etc. Yes, much better, and you're going to get more data. Presumably, think about how you want to report this data out. Do you really want to say, well, we had 49 people who said morning and 51 people who said afternoon? That doesn't help you very much. But if you do the individual time slots, you may find that most people say 11 to 12. And then here's a suggestion for how to reword the question altogether. We are changing story time. Please select the time that works for you to go. And please select the best time. And you might want to make that a checklist so they can select more than one time. Or you could, if you think that the data set and the group that you're working with will get you a more clear data, you might say pick your 3 best times on a Saturday to attend story time and limit them to 3. And Donna is pointing out that the word just works. Choose which time works for you. That it would be better to say, choose which time works best for you. That kind of pushes people to think a little bit about their personal preferences, and instead of just checking all the times, they will be more selective. Good point. And then from a comment from Sarah, when would you be most likely to come in? To come is different from works. Yes, that's true. So choose which time, not just works for you, but choose which time you are most likely to attend story time on Saturday. Even more specific, and also more of a qualifier to get some perhaps better responses. So really look at your questions, try them out with your peers, have people try them out, maybe ask a few of the stakeholders to run through the survey so you can see what their responses look like before you release it to the public. All those things will help your validity and your reliability. Like I said, pre-test, that's the thing. So for validity, are you getting the data you want? And for reliability, you might want to also rearrange the questions so different people take them in different order and see if the responses are still consistent. Or you can also just put this in front of somebody who's got knowledge of the stakeholder or is the stakeholder, the audience for your questionnaire, and then ask them to take the survey, but also to talk out loud about what they're thinking in their head as they're reading through the question. And it's a little hard to get people to do this sometimes, but when you can, it's really revealing. You can say, well, just tell me what you're thinking as you read this question and respond to it. And they'll say, well, as I read this, I'm thinking, you're looking for a better time for story time, and I'm immediately wondering, why I like this time we have. And so I'm reluctant to fill out the survey or something. They might just tell you some things that will be useful to you as you format the survey. So, have you got it? After that, reliable and valid. Two different metrics that we're going to be looking at for every question, and just going to be keeping that stuff in mind. This doesn't have to be like, if you have questions that you've used before, and they have gotten you the data you've wanted, reuse them exactly the same way, or just modify them for the new situation without changing them much. Don't get too creative with your questions. I'm a pretty creative person, but this isn't an area I like to get very creative in. People are accustomed to what survey questions look like. As Sarah pointed out, using most likely instead of what works for you. That's a very common language. So pull from if you get a survey question you find someplace else that you think, wow, that's written really well, make a note of it and maybe consider using that question for part of your research. So any questions about validity and reliability before we move on to looking at qualitative, quantitative data and formative, summative data types? You guys have been very engaged, and it makes it a lot more fun for me. So now we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the different data types. And we did kind of introduce this a little last week, but we're going to dive a little deeper today. Qualitative and quantitative. So last week, we discussed actually closed and open questions, which kind of start to get you into this this realm of thinking about, how you want your data to report out. So the types of data that we can get from two different types of questions. Now, I will point out that you can get quantitative data from an open question. And sometimes that's the best way to get your quantitative data. The only difference between quantitative and qualitative is that some people just prefer one or the other. Quantitative means you're going to be able to report numbers, percentages, bar graphs, pie charts, and for many people who are, in my opinion, are not real researchers, that's real data to them. And so depending on who you're reporting back out or how you're using your data, you may need some of that quantitative data to convince or to inform the group that you're working with, or to inform yourself, or to report on something. So I'm not saying it's bad data, but I think quantitative data doesn't quite tell a whole story the way that qualitative data can. So I think in most cases, a lot of research, we may be looking for quantitative data when we really need qualitative data. So I just want to challenge you to be open-minded about the data type you really need. Consider both of them, and we're also going to talk about formative and summative data, but consider them equal in value. And don't let anybody tell you that qualitative data is not a fact. It certainly is a fact. So we have a couple questions in the chat box. Would you, oh no, we didn't, sorry. That was from the previous conversation. So does anybody have any more they would like to share about qualitative data and ways that you can report that out? I mean, if you've had a bunch of people respond with a short answer or a paragraph, then how do you report that out? You got a bunch. I sometimes use selected comments in my reports. People seem, my commissioners really like to see selected comments and from our groups that we work with. And I've used word clouds, so it's pretty easy to pull text out from your qualitative data and throw it into a word cloud, and that gives you a very visual representation. Carly has a comment. However, if you're going to do a lot of surveys that need to be compiled, or if you need to quantitate, yes, exactly. Yes, definitely. And she says that is a lesson learned from hard rocks experience, no doubt. Yes, neither of these is better than the other. That's my point. And I think quantitative data sometimes gets presented as better. I think the other thing about qualitative data is it can be really useful to your overall analysis. So oftentimes you want to have both in your surveys. You want quantitative data to give you some statistical analysis, and qualitative data to help tell and round out the story. So formative and summative, have you guys heard these terms before? Used a lot in educational research. Yes, good. So formative data is planned as feedback that you will use to modify or adjust your activities, or it's something that data you're collecting to inform a decision that you're about to make. So as we're moving into a world where people are really interested in formative decision making and database decisions, and we hear a lot about all of that, formative data has gotten a lot more attention recently, which is kind of cool, I think. So Sarah points out that qualitative, just going back to that a little bit, qualitative tends to be more open to, and you don't have an open place. If you don't have an open place, you miss a lot of important stuff that you didn't know to ask about. That is very important, Sarah. Thank you for commenting about that. So back to qualitative, that it just rounds out your understanding of an issue or a topic. So summative data is a report. So we do a lot of summative data in our work, when we're filing our reports to our funders or to our boards and to our community members. It's something we all have to do every day, but it's really important to think about these as data types. So when we ask a question and we structure a questionnaire or a survey, it's good to think about, is this formative? Is this going to inform my decision and maybe institute a change? Or is this summative? It's just a report and I may or may not put it on the shelf and not do anything with it later on. And that's going to really inform how you structure your questions. And I will point out that while it's really important to document all the relative success that we have in our libraries and to get those board reports done and those annual reports done and those grant reports done. Those are all really, really important things. In my opinion, I just wish we spent more time in the formative data type of analysis, because I think that it's oftentimes a really productive place to be. I actually sometimes refer to it as formative. It's informative because, and I know when I do instructional evaluation, I'm basically looking, when I evaluate this class with you guys, I will be doing a report on how many people came and what you all learned, but mostly I'm interested in what you want to learn next. So I include formative questions in my evaluation. I want to know what follow-up you need, what I need to know as an instructional designer, what training I need to plan next. So as you write your questions, just be mindful of your intentions for the survey and the questionnaire. So for the survey questionnaire, is it to inform your practice or to report on something? Because that's going to make a difference in how you formulate those questions. So this is just a recap from last week. So we use a questionnaire when you have data for comparative analysis, you need information from a large population, you can manage the inherent bias that we have that exists in questionnaires, you can manage it and minimize it, really, and you need information quickly. These are all good reasons to go ahead and do a questionnaire. You don't have to have all these reasons in place to do a questionnaire. You could just say, I need the information quickly and I can manage it, any inherent bias. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the questionnaire. It's not necessarily a large group. I don't have any comparative analysis, but I do need the information quickly, and that's when a questionnaire is best. It's the best tool. So let's see. Let's take the example. Just think for a second about your monthly checkouts. Just a little test here. If you're doing a report on monthly checkouts that you provide to your board or your city commission or something, would that be formative or summative analysis? Summative, thank you. Yep, looks like everybody's got summative, absolutely. So now think about an example of collecting information from a really big group. Say like when you want to schedule that Saturday story time and you want to reach out beyond people who come normally into the library. So you really want to get out there and get a big group to have input on that story time, and you're asking them some questions. Yeah, now we're formative, exactly. Once you get out there it's still a big group, it's still appropriate for a questionnaire, but the data type we want is different. Summative formative versus summative. So let's go to another thing that a lot of you are familiar with, writing a report on summer reading activities. Is it formative or summative? Abby's saying it's both. That's interesting. Can be both. That's right. Yes, maybe your report on summer reading activities includes analysis on plans for next year or things that need to be changed. certainly can be both. Let's have another one. How about, there's a couple more actually. So we had the best time for story time. We talked about that one. So what about the book club selections for next year? Formative or summative? For book club selections, you're asking a poll to ask what people would like to choose for their book club next year. You guys are saying summative, and I would say formative. I'm interested to know about why you say summative. Yeah, I think it's formative. It's informing your decision making. And Abby is saying, well, I'm adding up how many choose the same files. Okay, it is quantitative. That's true. It's quantitative, but it's informing a decision, so it's formative. And but you're absolutely right. It is quantitative. And yeah, and I maybe need to back up a little, but let's not confuse quantitative versus qualitative. Quantitative can be reported out in numbers or graphs or charts. Qualitative is primarily, text or other kinds of responses that can't really be reported out very well in charts. You can do a word cloud. You can do some text analysis, but those are two different data. That's one type. Those are two different types of data, and then formative and summative analysis are two different types of data, and they can be any mix-up. So you can have a summative report that has qualitative and quantitative data in it. You could have a summative report that just has quantitative data, and you can have a formative analysis that has qualitative and quantitative. And the reason I'm kind of throwing all these terms around and we're spending so much time with them is that thinking about that ahead of time before putting your question together is really, really helpful. So you guys did some homework. I want to put that to work now. You provided, several of you provided me with a research question, and you took a couple stabs at an open and closed question without having all of this training this week and all the time we took to analyze questions. How are we doing for time? Okay, getting there. So let's really kind of rush through this a little bit, but this is some of the feedback I got from you and from a previous class, and I thought we could look at these questions. So here's the research question: how do reference librarians answer patrons' legal and law related questions, and what resources do they use or point to? So the research question has an "and" in it, and that makes me nervous. It's really two questions, but they're so closely related that it doesn't make me crazy. But then we have this question: do you receive legal or law related questions? Is the first question on this is the first question on the survey. Is this an appropriate, valid question? Is it likely to be reliable? Related? Should we be rewriting the research question? What do you think? As I read this, I'm wondering if the writer really wanted to say something like, what are the methods and resources that librarians use to respond to patrons' legal questions? Something a little bit more focused. Or maybe they meant to say something like, what do reference librarians need to know in order to answer patrons' legal questions? It just seems like the research question itself is a little, yeah, they need a lawyer, right? They need a lawyer. They do, but people will still come to the library to ask legal questions. How about this one? Let's go look at another one real quick. How are faculty and students using the new website? How do you like that for a research question? And then the question underneath that is, how often do you visit the college webpage in a week? So if this person did not actually list answer choices for this closed question. So this is an okay research question. How are faculty and students using the new library website? Okay, but this question needs answer choices. And we talked about this earlier, so we can maybe skip it now, but basically we need to have a list of how often do you visit the college web page in a week? Never, once or twice, three or more times, something like that. It's a bit confusing. How about this one? How should our branch library allocate 10 additional open hours to their current schedule? This is a question that comes up at libraries. You suddenly are going to be able to add a few hours, open hours. And here's the question underneath that. If the library were to add 10 more open hours, what 3 days and times would you most want the library to be open? How do you think that question might be improved? Are we focusing on formative or summative data here? Yeah, but definitely give specific days and times. Yes, ask them to choose. Yeah, that work for the staff. Yes, make sure you're not going to have them all say, well, we want Tuesday afternoon, and that's the one day that you can't do for some reason. Yeah, something that narrows the field. Yes. It's a formative question, bit of data that you're looking for. It's definitely going to inform your decision making. I'm going to skip the next one because we're kind of running out of time here. And I want to make sure that you get prepared for next class. So if you haven't already, take the time to write that, make a stab at that research question. It'll really help you with this class, kind of getting something out of it. And my next request from you may seem a little strange, but I want you to write a question related to your research question that is awful, that is neither valid nor reliable. I want you to write the worst question you can think of. You don't have to share that with me, but the idea behind this, the intellectual idea behind this is that through the process of really writing a poor question, it will help the information about validity and reliability really stick. So make it bad first and then correct it. And then save your work in the class Google folder or send it to me. I know that Google folder doesn't always work. And I don't think this is actually the right, this isn't the right link anyway. So we do have just enough time to do a Kahoot. So if you have your smartphone or a tablet nearby, and if you don't, you can put your answers into the chat box. I will bring up our little game here. So you remember how this works. There's going to be, you're going to go, it'll be the instructions on the screen in just a second. So you go to kahoot.it. And you enter the game pin. It's going to ask you to put your name in. You can just put your initials. You can put some crazy acronym. I know who all you guys are. Give you a few more seconds. This is really fun. All right, let's start our game. So there's 3 questions. And you know these are all timed, right? So the information provided in this course, will it help you to get better data when you create a survey? So on your phone right now, press the blue, the red, the yellow. And there's 3 seconds left. Push quickly. Time is up. So I guess everybody is pretty happy with what you're learning. That's good. I'm just checking. So the next question is, of these topics, what do you need review on? So do you need review on creating a research question, knowing when to use questionnaire, how to write valid, reliable questions, or none of these? You're good. And we got 6 people to answer that one, and it says how to write more valid, reliable questions. Oh, good. Then I will just we'll start next class with a few examples, and we'll go through that validity and reliability with just a little bit one more time. And I think it'll really help you if you try to write a bad question and then correct it. So give that a try, and then when we come back next week, we'll start with that, okay? One more question. I'm already or am planning to use the skills I learned in this course. So you have 20 seconds. So you're going to do it in the next month and the next year, or probably never, Joe. Forget it. I don't even know why I'm in this course. And everybody answered this time, and we've got within the next year. So yeah, so next month's pretty busy, so that's good. So within the next month or within the next year. So I am so glad to hear that you're finding this helpful. And with that, I'm going to let you go, stop our recording, and I will be happy to stay online and answer any other questions or provide any other help. I really appreciate it. I talked with a couple of you during the week, and that's been really fun too. So hopefully you're enjoying this half as much as I am. Thanks, everybody.